The former States President, George W. Bush, is on record as saying, "It's clearly a budget, it's got lots of numbers in it." Well, that description most certainly fits the Pink Book, as it has been known for many decades. That's the book of the Isle of Man budget, which details anticipated financial performance of the government, income and expenditure, department by department, and all the other services of government, in pages of figures, graphs and explanations. It tells us how and where over £1 billion will be spent in the next financial year and where it's hoped the money will come from. It also warns us that if all goes well, there will still be a shortfall of over £67 billion to be drawn from the national piggy bank, the reserves. It's interesting to look at the spending per head, because it equates to 12,667 per head for every man, woman and child of the island's population. And the biggest spenders per person are social security and care at 3,953, health at 2,621, education at 1,331, and money for former government employees' pensions at 1,278. There's more spent on those pensions than on the police, fire, prison, food, agriculture, transport and waste management, sport and arts all put together. At the end of the week, when the budget has been held in the media spotlight, and in today's programme, we shall take a second look at it, in general, with some of the less obvious measures and implications. With us today as our studio guest is the man who has had the task of compiling the budget with the assistance of his Treasury staff and then presenting it to Tynwald for approval, the Treasury Minister, MHK for Air and Michael Alfred Cannan. Well, thank you for joining us this morning, Alfred.
That's a pleasure, Roger.
Yes, we're at the end of a busy week.
Been a very busy week, as you might imagine.
Yeah. Well, apart from presenting it in Tynwald, what else do you get up to in Budget Week?
Well, there are presentations. We've got a fairly busy budget breakfast the following day, primarily focused on the business community. There are lots of media briefings, lots of discussions, as you might imagine. Actually, this coming week, there's quite a lot on as well. Tomorrow night, for example, I'm with the Positive Action Group in Douglas.
And that's at the Market Hall still, is it?
That's
Legion
right.
Hall, yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as fulfilling a number of other commitments. So there's a lot to do following a budget.
Well, of course, that's the 2 weeks around the budget, the presentation of it, the release to the public. How long is the run-up to the budget? Does it almost, the next year's budget, start next week?
Well, certainly. I mean, on Friday I met the Treasury team just to review what had happened, consolidate some of our ideas in terms of how we might progress next year following the feedback that was given in Tynwald and other feedback that we've picked up on. And what will happen in the sort of June, July time, I will meet with the Treasury team for a pre-meeting, if you like. We will consolidate and start putting together some of our ideas of what might need to be done. And then we will have, as well as Treasury meetings, we'll have a number of then meetings with departments in the sort of late summer into September, October, where we will meet with departments, look at the spending plans that they're putting forward, looking at the plans that they are wanting, or areas they're wanting to invest in. And those departmental meetings, we're meeting with the politicians as well, so they're looking to input from a departmental perspective. And then Treasury will evaluate finally and decide where the money should go based on the programme for government. We'll then take a budget to the Council of Ministers for initial approval, and then following that we'll put our finishing touches to it and deliver it in February. So there is a long period for us to put this together, consult with departments, consult with politicians from the departments, and then ultimately deliver it.
I suppose during that period also, considering you're now entering a new financial year with a new set of figures, a new set of aims and objectives, you're talking about halfway through the year during what you were telling me there. I presume there's some looking at how things are going and whether in fact they're on target.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you would expect, we see quarterly figures. The Treasury team, myself, Bill Shimmons, Ralph Peake, Bill Henderson and the officers, we meet weekly, but in terms of looking at formally at the statistics, we get proper quarterly reports through delivered to us, so we can see clearly that what's happening across government, that departments are meeting their spending targets, and that we're getting any recognition of any problems at a fairly early stage.
Right now, in your speech, you started off in your speech last Tuesday by saying and I'm basically quoting here, that we've been getting busy growing jobs in the economy, getting busy redefining our capital programme, getting busy seeking better value from our public spending commitments, and getting busy refocusing our welfare support. Now, you use the word we there. Who's the we in that case?
Well, primarily, I'm talking about the government. I'm talking quite a lot about Treasury in terms of the way we've been refocusing our sort of social security support. But more broadly, I'm also actually talking both about the government and also about society when I talk about economic growth. I don't think you can just put everything down to the government's achievements. You have to look at what society as a whole is achieving when you see the figures coming through. 700 more registered taxpayers contributing to our society. 280 new jobs we think were created last year. We're targeting, the government's targeting at getting 400 new jobs into the economy. And of course, from an economic perspective, that's why we're putting another £5 million into grants and support for new businesses, established businesses where they're seeking growth, whilst we've got, while we're still supporting the economic development scheme, which is running at the annual sort of £10 million per annum. So we're putting a lot of emphasis, when I say we, government's putting a lot of emphasis in supporting and helping business and individuals grow their wealth and grow their businesses, and obviously create the jobs alongside that. And then more broadly, I've talked about social security, and of course the other achievements that we're seeking to deliver as a government. And I encapsulated that because I did want to reflect on a budget that has delivered far better economic results or income levels than government was expecting, or we were expecting when I delivered the first budget. And those economic results, which have resulted in a £18 million surplus, have meant that we're putting £11 million back into our reserves. But I did sound a note of caution in that, because I did highlight that we are still budgeting for a £67 million deficit next year. So there is still a long way to go, but we have had a very solid year this year, and I think it's important that I let people know that we are working hard to try and grow the economy, but also grow and develop society and get better results, get better value from taxpayers' funds.
Well, you mentioned that when you call society, whether it's business or whatever it may be, there always used to be in the past a feeling that whilst government's aims and objectives were undoubtedly quite good at times, the actual method of implementing them was very bureaucratic and cumbersome and got in the road of people doing things. I mean, have you smoothed out the systems of cooperating and working with external business these days, especially when you've now got such a sophisticated and wide-ranging support scheme?
Well, I think there's always a certain amount of bureaucracy around these things, but I think that it wasn't so much business that's been the main focus for us as a government, but rather trying to perhaps get money into the economy, back into those areas of society that have needed it most, and that really has meant and determined why we've taken actions such as, for example, raising the personal allowance, such as focusing welfare support mechanisms around young families, particularly those with low incomes, and why in this budget, as well as the sort of young family element which we picked up from last year, we also directed and targeted quite a lot of additional support into the elderly in nursing care, because we recognise there's a substantial amount of costs there in that particular sector. So the link between government and its customers in terms of, or the people, is very important. It's absolutely right that we try and remove this sort of bureaucracy around obtaining funding, whether that's from a business perspective or whether that is from those who need it most. And that's it is partly what we've been trying to do when we've refocused our benefit rates and really trying to target them into the areas that need it most, and to try and get that money in there as quickly as we can.
By bureaucracy, I didn't necessarily mean there shouldn't be any paperwork. After all, it's public money. But what I was suggesting is, and I've seen this happen and with a number of people who wish to apply for some support in a particular scheme, commercial scheme, and the time it takes from the application to the decision was outside the scope of what the business needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think we all recognise there are times when government doesn't react quickly enough. But we do need to take a lot of care when we are distributing public funds into business. Some of the funding can be quite larger, particularly now with the EDS, the Economic Development Scheme. And it's right that appropriate due diligence is put in place when you're talking about potentially now grants of millions of pounds. I think from the smaller grants perspective, the £5 million that we give to the Department for Enterprise to deliver, I would hope that businesses do have a fairly considered and appropriate route to access this type of money. I think it is important that when a business is at a growth stage, they have a proper timescale to work to. But it's also important, Roger, and I've seen this before. Businesses come along, they've said they want money, and then getting basic information such as the accounts or information around sort of funding levels can be difficult, or perhaps cash flow projections. And I think there's a two-way street here. If people want that public money, it's there for them. We're absolutely committed to growing the economy, but they've also got to help us ensure that we've completed our due diligence so that we're comfortable that public money is being put into the right place.
Now, you mentioned during the conversation earlier that you've got an increase in tax revenues, an increase in a series of things, and the population is up, which I presume is contributing significantly to that. Where are these people coming from?
Well, we've got 280 new jobs that I think were created, and the last set of statistics showed that the net outflow of people from the island had been reversed. In terms of where they're coming from, it would appear that mostly being supported by business. We also have a relocation support scheme whereby we will help a business bring people to the island and pay them once that help refund them once that person has been in employment for 12 months. So a business can claim up to £10,000 to help them with that relocation. Since April, £1 million has been committed for that scheme, and 100 people have taken advantage of that, or businesses employing up to 100 people. So the support mechanism is in place to help attract people from off island. And when you look at our unemployment rates, with being so low, 400 or so unemployed, it's a very, very small number.
Well,
and we have these limitations. It's absolutely right. We help those people who are unemployed and do everything we can to get them back into employment. We also must recognise that it's a very, very narrow base, and we must help now support and encourage that inflow to continue. And I think there's been a number of positive results since this government came into power in 2016. Not only have we reversed that outflow of people, I think the measures that we've put in place have made people think about now staying on the island. I think the personal allowances increases, for example, £2,750 in additional personal allowances increases, which has put as much as up to £700 back into the pocket of a working family.
Well, maybe we could come to that in a short while.
These are the sorts of measures, though, Roger. Not only just that, but the way that we've targeted our plans to support lower income families, for example, has meant, and I think it has helped them both stay in employment, think about staying longer in employment, and also has helped when families from across the water have been looking at coming here, because we do need to be financially competitive, and people do take a close look at their spending and likely spending plans when they're thinking of moving to the Isle of Man.
But that still, of course, doesn't really answer the question of where they're coming from and what they're coming to do. Is it any particular sector of the economy that has got this skill shortage?
Well, we have seen growth in some sectors. I mean, the e-commerce, e-business sector continues to grow. Actually, there's been some good growth in the financial services sector. Life assurance industry, for example, is seeing positive growth. Yes, there has been a little bit of negativity in the jobs market around tourism and construction, but in general terms, I think there's been quite broad positivity in the economy generally, and we can see from the business survey that's just been published that a lot of businesses are now looking to the future to grow and indicating that they are considering recruiting. So it is primarily into our business base that the people are coming.
Well, you said also it's a matter of confidence, isn't it? A business confidence survey, which is separate to your budget, but it's carried out. You said it indicates overall an environment of optimism for future growth. Well, there's no doubt some businesses in the Isle of Man in the last few years have been in a fairly dark place. They've been struggling to survive. Do you still see, as your predecessor did, that we have two economies?
Well, I think we're probably starting to narrow the gap a little bit. It is difficult for some sectors. Things are still difficult in retail. I think it's not an easy situation.
Probably getting worse, actually. Well, in some ways, especially with the internet.
I don't know that I've got a lot of evidence about things getting worse. In fact, if anything, I would suggest there's some really positive signs on our high street at the moment. Particularly when you look at the arrival of businesses like Sports Direct and potentially others on the horizon. But again, if we're going to help these sorts of sectors, what we needed to do and what we still need to do is to try and make the cost of living difficulties that have occurred in the last 10 years easier. And the way that government can help that, as I said, is to try and get more money into people's pockets and also try and deliver some targeted support. And that's why we've when you look at what we're doing, I don't want to keep harping back, but when you look at what we've done around our social security, you'll see that this year, for example, we've really targeted employed persons allowance. So that's for the support mechanism we give to our people in low-paid jobs. Not only have we increased their allowances, but we've also given them significant increases to their childcare support. Again, not only just helping them, £100 more per week extra for
this is fine.
childcare maximum.
This is fine, but I hear said, because we've been doing a little homework before this programme, thank you, great, good news, but the problem is with inflation, with charges going up all over the place, including government charges, with the adjustments on the way social security is calculated, we'll end up having less in some cases.
Well, I mean, I would challenge that, and I'd like to see those calculations.
3% inflation to start with.
Well, okay, I can see there's 3% inflation. You'll see that most of our benefits have gone up by 3%. We've also taken steps, Roger. I mean, in last autumn we wrote off the £95 million of debt around the MUA. That means that from this April, water and sewerage charges will be frozen. And whilst the electricity I expect to be sort of capped at around 2%, we know that's going to happen. That's another step forward that we have taken to try and ease the pressure. And I accept that this is not a perfect world. There is a lot going on. And we do have to try and make things right. But we can't just solve all the problems by blowing our fiscal discipline, giving above inflation increases across the benefits system or above across the departmental spending budgets, because what will happen in the end, Roger, is that we will lose our financial discipline. In 2020, 2021, instead of getting ourselves back into surplus, we'll find we're still in deficit. But not only will we be in deficit, because we've blown the lid on this financial discipline, it will have permeated throughout government, and we'll be facing above inflation costs year on year. And what will happen is society, government finances will be in a worse position, and will be facing more problems rather than having actually taken the positive but sometimes difficult steps getting our finances back into shape.
I'm not actually in any way in what I was saying to you disagreeing with all of that. What I was actually saying is your job as Treasury Minister, the Chancellor in other countries, whatever it may be, always has a positive view in the budget, always puts a spin on it, always seeks to inspire confidence in the various people. It's part of the job, we understand that. But there are bound to be, behind the figures, people who say, oh, hang on a minute. And whilst I'm not actually criticising that, what I'm saying is that people listening to what you say, wage growth is still below inflation.
Well, it is in some areas. I mean, you look at the...
you're not all in the gambling business.
Well, no, I appreciate that. But it's very absolutely important to recognise that, we've had the earnings survey just published. Our non-manual workers actually, according to that, are up to 10%, are earning 10% more in 2017 than they were in 2016. Actually, the critical area that appears to be a focus is the manual working side, where it appears that any wage growth, if there is any, is limited and possibly it's slightly negative. So it does show actually that there are some positive elements in society. There are also clearly, and I think it's absolutely right we work on evidence rather than supposition, that there are some areas that are going to need some further work. But also, let's be clear here, Roger. I mean, we can't solve all the problems in one go. And we do, therefore, each year as we move on to our budgets, we have to take consideration as to what society needs. But I think we're in a better place now than we were 2 years ago. When you think back to when we came into our roles and all the problems and issues we'd been, and I don't want to just harp on about personal allowances, but it's a good indicator. We were £1,000 less than the UK on our personal allowances, and look at us now. We're well ahead of where they are. So, across the board, actually, when you look at what we've set out to achieve, I think we have set out in a targeted, focused, controlled, disciplined manner to get money into those areas that need it, and also support our businesses.
Right,
and sorry, just finish, Roger. The results that we're getting in evidence, I think, that on the whole, this government is doing the right thing.
Okay, well, I'm fine, but I mean, this is, forgive me, but what we're talking about here is basically the government PR message again. I'm just trying to bring through to you what I'm picking up from various people outside there. And most of the people are not saying it's a lousy budget, but what they're saying is we've got to take a number of issues into account. Some of those are not necessarily something you can do about, but nevertheless, they're out there. Like 14% of the workforce still on a living wage, which is £8.61 an hour. Which is way below some of the figures you're talking about.
So Roger, well, fine, and I don't think for any moment that anybody is not denying that we have work to do. But rather than just sort of pouring money into benefits, what we need to do is to help support and create opportunity for people, help and support those in work to stay in work, and to try and help some of the broader issues around sort of living wages, for example. And let's face it, government's only just moving to this living wage support benchmark. We need to, first of all, start to encourage private enterprise to move to the living wage, and government has to potentially look at and deal with the 80 or so people on its books who are currently below that living wage. And yes, I think we need to get there, but government also needs to take steps in terms of the way it addresses these issues that are considered and measured and focused, rather than just this sort of broad, let's just increase our whole benefit system by above inflation, and that's going to solve all society's ills, because it's not.
Well, employment, you're talking about expanding the economy, employment, but there's 2 or 3 fundamentals, traditional fundamentals to our economy, and one of those is construction. And recent reports show that of all the various industries around the island, construction is the least confident of growth.
Yeah, but, and again, that's, and I, I accept that. I accept that in construction, if you're terming in the manual workers side, there may be some issues there in terms of the remuneration that they are getting. And government will have to have a look, I think, carefully at how it is continuing to run its procurement policies. But we did change and reform and redefine our procurement. We brought a new set of policies forward very recently on that. And also, I think when you look across the island now, what's going on, there is actually a lot of construction going on. I mean, I think clearly highlighted in Douglas, and government as well has set up a fairly robust, defined capital programme, up to £423 million worth of expenditure in the next 5 years. Now that is absolutely necessary to put the right infrastructure in place for society, to build our schools, to build our hospitals. But also, the added bonus on that is that it also sets a very good platform for the construction industry and the associated industries around that. So it's absolutely vital, I think, that we maintain consistency in that area. And therefore, this issue about whether there is or isn't enough construction, I think is a delicately balanced one, because you do tend to swing from one side of the spectrum to the other. But I can tell you, if you think about it, you look at the Mount Murray construction that's going on there. You talked recently about what's been going on with the Park Hotel in Ramsey. You look at the new hotel, Premier Inn, going up outside Marks and Spencer's, the potential now plans that we all hope to come to fruition for Lord Street. In September, we're going to start work on the promenade scheme. So there's actually, and as well as we're going to develop East Clift and many other, the NSC, for example, £3 million refurbishment going on there. So actually, I think there is a lot in the bag for construction, and we will need to be careful, Roger, that we don't necessarily, because construction is one of those industries,
well, it was overheated at one time, wasn't it?
That swings.
Yeah. Right, now let's move on from that, because there's so many different topics that we could talk about. But the one, the dark corner of everything is public sector pensions. And that's still there, and it's still telling us that the reserve is depleted and going to conk out in a few years' time, and will leave then 45 million to be picked up from revenue accounts, which means a reduction in public services. So this is hasn't for a long time, and still isn't going down very well with the general public.
And Roger, you'll know that I've spent a long 5 years on the back benches, really highlighting this issue and pushing for solutions. And there has been some movement with this, in that employees now are paying more into their pensions, and in some cases, but potentially the rewards ultimately, and the end rewards are being diluted. But there is no complacency from Treasury in this respect, or from me. I think one of the things that I was absolutely keen on was that this issue was not blurred by hiking up charges within government to cover the shortfalls. In fact, previously, under the last financial plan, the taxpayers' contribution for public sector pensions was steadily increasing year on year. Well, we've canned that. We've put a straight 15% on the employer's contribution, and we've said that's enough from revenue to go into pensions. As a result, now we're going to have a much earlier depletion of this fund. But I think it's right that the pressure is now on us to deliver a solution. We haven't not got a lot of time left now before this drops in. One thing that won't happen, though, Roger, just to pick up on a couple of your points, is that this is going to come as a massive shock, because we're planning for this.
It's in the budget, but
yes,
yeah.
But I think you'll have to recognise that part of the planning process is to ensure that we can transition smoothly through this period, rather than having we've got £45 million or £50 million to find. So public finances are being well geared to cope with that. And I have already committed to Tynwald in the budget debate. Firstly, that complacency, not only just on public sector pensions, but generally about our economy, is completely off the table. But secondly, we need a solution. I can tell you we are and have been pushing in the Treasury to come up with a solution. And I fully expect that we'll be debating this within the next 3 or 4 months.
Well, it's been debated a few times, of course, and there are two issues, really, isn't it? It's to today's pension you're offering existing employees and future employees, and the legacy issue, which is completely different. And that really is the difficult one, because that's the one that can make no change, can make no plans. You're stuck with it. Those previously employed. But there doesn't seem to be in looking forward, and we've had programmes here where the committees that have been dealing with this have been here twice. We did it. There seemed to be no willingness to scrap the final salary scheme. That does seem to be the cause of a great deal of the trouble. All over Europe nearly it's been abandoned now. But we still, and most companies have packed it in, but we still persist with it.
Well, companies absolutely have packed it in. I think there's only 2 or 3 of these schemes in existence in the FTSE 100, and quite rightly so. But when the companies have packed this in, of course, they have had funds available. They have had a fund to support their liabilities. Unfortunately, not only the Manx government, but governments across Western Europe did not create funds to support these pensions, and as a result we do have to deal with the hangover from all that. But I think the point is that and the assurance that I want to give you, we talk about potentially closing the scheme to closing the scheme to everybody. I think it straight away tomorrow seems to be an option that's not on the table from an affordability perspective, but there may be options around closing this to new entrants. As I said, we are having these discussions at the moment, Roger, and I expect that we will be in a position to bring this back to the floor of Tynwald and to the public for a proper debate within the next 2 or 3 months, certainly before the end of this parliamentary year.
Because the clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking. I think we recognise that, and we're not complacent about this. That's why it's clearly highlighted in the accounts. That's why in all the presentations I've been doing, I've been making sure that it is a key talking point, and it's also something that we have really brought out in the Pink Book, and so we're not hiding away. I said right at the beginning last year, if we're going to be successful, if this government's going to be successful, we have to recognise our challenges, and recognising your challenges and being open about them is the first key step. But secondly, obviously, not only that, we've got to bring out some solutions, and it is going to be incumbent on this administration to deliver that, because we cannot wait until 2021.
I appreciate it's difficult because in the 2, in fact 3 programmes, because we did half a programme as well, each programme, the actuarial forecasts changed dramatically from one to the other. So it was very difficult for anybody, we thought, to make a positive decision, but as soon as they went to one point, it changed again.
I think, yeah, and the important thing is just to stay focused on the cash flow. I mean, these liability assessments, there's a variety of factors that will influence those. The important thing is we must remain focused really on the cash flow implications of this.
Now, you involved the public with this SAVE scheme idea. You got a response, and I see that you've said you got a better response to this consultation than most of them. You got some quite good ideas. Probably some of them were not so good, but you've distilled it down to a number of ideas you think are probably good and workable. But I found it one phrase in the remark which I didn't fully understand, and that was, I quote, "Departments to retain 50% of the revenue savings recouped from savings projects." That's clear enough. But whilst allowing 50% of the savings to be locked into budgets for future years. So that additional 50% or the same 50%. In other words, if they make savings, they can keep it.
Yeah, well, yes, but of course, there is a limiting factor, because a lot of these budgets are under significant control at the moment, in that they're not, and they haven't been getting for a while, any real increase. Although within the budget this year, we did give almost £14 million of targeted investment. So what we're saying to departments in terms of their own initiatives and their own ideas is, we need some sort of incentive for them to make savings. So, 50% of that will go into a fund, and you can come to the Treasury and call on that fund if you think you've got additional spending ideas or needs, and we'll consider those. And so we'll be using that money to help support you deliver your services to the public. But you can also lock in your savings into future years. And what that means is that really what we're trying to say is, look, you find the savings. Let's reprioritize them within your budgets. Let's make sure they're getting into the key areas. And of course, but bear in mind, your budgets are on a significant cost control platform, so you will need this money to be allocated to other areas if you're going to successfully deliver what we're
So the old system where we used to see departments scrabbling to spend the last of their budget before it was taken off them is gone, has it?
Well, yeah, very well. We're absolutely, well, we are being very carefully, trying very careful to ensure that departments, the purpose of that Best to Save scheme was to ensure that departments didn't feel they had to necessarily spend all that money or they wouldn't get it in future years.
Couldn't carry
and
it
we
forward.
need to be more pragmatic about it. But so that's, in terms of that, that's why I also announced that we are going to look at changing our budgeting methods, Roger, and look at this priority-based budgeting system, which has been in use in some local authorities and in some national circumstances in the UK. We're going to pilot it over here. The budgeting system that we're using has been around for decades. I think it's right that we try something new and look at rolling out and assessing whether priority-based budgeting, whereby we go into departments and look carefully at what their priorities are and assess whether they're directing money in the proper way and challenging them on some of their spending is a new way, and I hope will bring us some positive results.
And it won't have to go into this bidding process.
Yeah, so I mean, I expect them still to be bidding for next year, but if we can get a successful trial period, and we'll see how it impacts then on the way they then need to come to Treasury for the budgets, and we just need to assess the costs around that and ensure that we are actually delivering some proper outcomes.
At this point now in the programme, we'll take a commercial break to return with more about this year's budget in just about 3 minutes. Our studio guest today is the Treasury Minister, member of the House of Keys, Alfred Cannan. Now, it's been a busy week for him, focused almost entirely on the 2018-19 national budget. And in today's Sunday Opinion, we're taking a closer look at just some of the measures announced in that budget and discussing their implications. One of those, of course, which pops up in different forms all over the place, Alfred, is digitisation. And you've got £7.5 million ring-fenced for that. That's a lot of money.
Well, it's an ongoing, I mean, that fund's already been in existence, so that's not what we're highlighting in that, as we're going to continue to support that fund and on an ongoing basis. So it's not actually £7 million coming straight out of this budget this year. But what I mean, government's had this ongoing programme for a while now, Roger. I mean, I think that you can see some of the results of that with Isle of Man. If you go onto the gov.im website, if you register for any personal services, whether you're paying VAT as a business or you want to go online yourself and pay your taxation bills or access other services from government. And I think you can also see that, for example, in the health service now. It's been rolled out, the GP access service, where you can now go online and register and you can look at all your medical records and book your appointments, etc. So look, I don't think it's anything sort of untoward. I think it's good value spending on the whole, and government's got to continue to develop its digitalisation. It does improve access to government for the community. It should, in theory, improve efficiency. I think I've quoted, I mean, the figures I asked for were that doing this now has helped save, over the last few years in total, we think about £20 million worth of savings, and those savings will have come from the ease of not having someone in the way of booking your appointments, potential staff savings. So it's something that government's got to carry on doing. And in fact, there was also a very interesting part in the budget. I think there's £11 million or so going to be spent on improving, almost in redeveloping and improving our national insurance, our income tax database, because they were being very archaic. They really are being held together by very old codings, and it's absolutely vital. Actually, it's in the national interest that we get those databases sorted out, because obviously they're at the forefront of everything that government does.
Your wording was interaction with government. It'll make it faster and easier. My first reaction was not necessarily, because quite recently I got a form which using the email version of getting into it, or the internet version of getting into it, was extremely, not cumbersome, but quite detailed, and went for a while. A lot easier just to sign the form and stick it in an envelope.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything, Roger. I mean, I think, government has to keep on improving its administration, and trying to make things easier for people. So we do take feedback like this, and we are looking at streamlining and making things simpler. And of course, actually, I mean, next year we're going to have the Manx state pension. That's why we've been trying to take measures to simplify all the administration around state pensions, for example. So when that comes into operation in April 2019, we hope there'll be a much more understandable system in place, a single state pension payment, and people will feel more at ease with the amounts of money they're receiving from that.
One of these problems I always see in communicating your business through a computer and an automated system is that it may speed up the efficiency of the transactions in most cases, but you lose something, and that is it goes impersonal. You lose the human contact, the human face of government.
Sure. I mean, actually, it's funny, I was only discussing this with someone the other day. I think in some areas government can be pretty faceless, with the people who are doing some very significant transactions on behalf of society. But I think actually government's represented in all sorts of ways, and I think public's interaction with government really starts with people out really doing the hard manual work, whether it's on the roads, clearing drains, doing your water, doing your sewerage. Really, they are very much the public face of government, and obviously there's a huge amount going on behind the scenes. But it is absolutely vital that government is seen and works conductively and conducively with society, so that there is a positive interaction. There shouldn't be walls between government and society. And I think that what we've been trying to encourage, certainly in the Treasury, is a very proactive, positive approach with people, particularly around taxation, particularly around benefits. It is, if you're out of work and you're looking to get back into work, we're trying to be much more tailored towards helping you do that. We're now moving, of course, the job centre down directly into social security, so there should be, for example, in that area, greater interaction with people. So yes, it's important that government doesn't take its eye off the ball when it comes to making sure it's properly interacting with the users of government services.
I heard it said in another country that the problem with digitisation is that it becomes not government by the people and for the people, but government to the people. In other words, it's more of an imposition by a digital thing. You don't have this saying to somebody, "Hang on a minute, that can't be right."
Well, I think if people need to challenge things, if something's wrong with whatever process they're trying to follow, then I hope that they can pick up the phone and arrange the meeting or speak to somebody directly. Certainly from my own perspective, I'm now registered and using all these services online. I find it pretty simple, pretty effective. I don't necessarily need to speak to somebody, so I'm just quite happy that it's done. I haven't had any issues with it. But yes, there are some negatives sometimes that maybe you just become a bit insular. I think it's very important that you do stay in touch with government. Remains very much in touch with society, very much in touch with its needs. Sometimes government can become a bit detached, and it does need reminding occasionally that it is there to serve society and not to serve itself. And we have had a lot of those debates 2 years ago, but that's why I think we are in a much better place from that perspective than we were 2 years ago.
Now, we've literally got under a minute before we go to the news. Alfred, you've got to stay on for the man in line. We've got so much more, and we are getting texts and emails coming in already.
I would be delighted to Roger.
Right. One of the things I'd like to talk to you about when we come back, of course, is that although the budget went through, you had one or two people who didn't quite see it your way. And one I'm particularly interested in was Mr. Speaker's comments, because it wasn't so much on your figures, but it was on the method of the budget. And I think that's quite important in some ways. Maybe we can deal with that when we come back, because there we must end today's Sunday Opinion, in which we explored with our guest, the Treasury Minister, MHK Alfred Cannan, various aspects and implications of the national budget, which he presented to Tynwald last Tuesday.